Welcome in to the Wolf Financial Live Show. My name is Gav Blacksberg. I'm the CEO at Wolf and your host for today. And joining me is Yuri from the Tema ETFs team. We're going to have a discussion today really about SpaceX, NASA, space investing, this thematic which has just gone absolutely berserk, especially in recent months. But I think people are looking forward to what this could become over the next decade. Yuri, thanks so much for joining me. Do you mind giving a brief introduction before we get rolling here?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, thanks for having me on. I'm really happy to discuss our ETF and just the space economy in general. Look, NASA is the first pure play space ETF out in the market. We're really focused on finding companies that have the best exposure to the space economy today, tomorrow, and out into the future. It's also the first ETF and only ETF in the space economy that brings SpaceX exposure. Look, for us, when we're thinking about the purity of exposure, it felt wrong not to have SpaceX and felt right to go through all of the trouble and analysis and legal stuff required to getting a private holding into an ETF and then managing that deliberately going forward. We also have exposure to companies that competing ETFs don't have because we've boiled the ocean, looked under every rock to find the most interesting space companies out there. And so we have a lot of interesting businesses, especially in the supply chain, so supplying companies like SpaceX and its competitors. And it's really finding those quality businesses that are often a bit cheaper, listed in other countries like Korea, Taiwan, UK, and give exposure to the space economy, but in maybe not your usual way investors are seen. And that leads me to the final point. This is an actively managed ETF. We're really professional investors who've been doing this for decades. And our focus is on applying risk management and thoughtful management to giving investors this exposure to what is an exciting theme.
Yeah, you hit on a few great points here. One, ETFs are becoming a vehicle that allows for more and more possibilities, right? Hey, you wanted to invest in this stock that's absolutely ripping in the Korean market, but you can't figure out how to do it through your brokerage? Well, here's an ETF that allows you to have exposure to it, right? Or, an actively managed strategy, right? You don't want to just be a passive investor. You don't have to sit there. You can have somebody that's constantly monitoring the markets for you. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this, especially the SpaceX exposure, how the SPV works, liquidity, pieces like that. Before we do so, for the investors that are watching, investors should carefully consider each fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses prior to investing, the fund's prospectus, and summary prospectus contain this and other information about Tema's ETFs. To obtain a fund's prospectus or summary prospectus, you can visit the website right at temaetfs.com and read those carefully prior to investing. Excited to be working together and collaborating as always. Let's jump into the deeper part of this conversation. So I want to start actually a little bit high level because I did a little bit of research on yourself, and your background is really in, I would say, quality investing, durable moats, long-term compounders. I think that that's an area which you really shown a knack for. And I'm curious, this is an interesting ETF coming from you because space is so early and so volatile of a sector, and it seems a little bit different. So I wanted to hear from you how you think about this sector.
Yeah, look, I think you're absolutely right. The core of what we try to do at Tema is find quality businesses because often, especially in some of these thematic areas, they can be really exciting, but then you have a lot of really low quality companies jumping in, a lot of frauds, bankruptcies, that kind of thing. And I think one of the things we really pride ourselves on is bringing that thoughtful approach to picking the companies. What does that mean in practice? It means we look for companies with good balance sheets and cash generation. And I think that's something we've brought to the space ETF, where unfortunately the history of space is a lot of companies go bust. So we spend a lot of time making sure they have the right funding in place and importantly generate cash as well to be able to deliver what they say they're going to deliver. The second bit is this thing we call the operating baseline. Are these solid businesses in the sense that are these good management teams? Are they overly promotional or not? Do they have skin in the game? Are they incentivized? And is this a quality business in the sense that if once the potential is achieved, is it going to have the right margin structure and business dynamic and moats to create a sustainable business? Now, there are tons of businesses in the marketplace that are hard to find that exist like that. In the space economy, they're just a bit earlier in their journey, if that makes sense. But we see a lot of potential for the early winners to establish these dominant positions. SpaceX is a perfect example of that. This is a company that's pushed the frontier in terms of vertically integrating, in terms of taking an enormous amount of market share and building this really fantastic business. And it's transformed the space economy from a kind of government-driven, very expensive, high-risk business to essentially commercial manufacturing business. And that, I think, is what makes us realize that there are going to be quality businesses that are going to arise following SpaceX's model and in other areas as well, because there's a transformation going on. There's a transformation of types of businesses away from these government-focused ones. The second bit is this inflection point, because launch costs are coming down, largely thanks to SpaceX. That is going to unlock other markets, and that same commercial mentality will be applied there, which creates really exciting opportunity for investors.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I want to dig into SpaceX a little bit deeper here, just showing people for a second what's inside of this NASA ETF that we're discussing. You can see the largest holding per the website, and this was updated as of Friday, was SpaceX by a good amount, multiple percentage points, SpaceX SPV exposure here. And so people that are purchasing, this NASA ETF, and again, if you want to check it out, people can look through on the website here, just kind of like what's going on here, what the idea is behind this investment. I want to talk about this study as well. You're getting access to companies like this. Now, what does this mean, Yuri, for people practically? Because SpaceX is still, obviously, like you mentioned, a private company, but they're exploring an IPO. They're talking about numbers like 1.5 or $2 trillion. And so it kind of mind boggles people a little bit, but what valuation are they getting SpaceX at in here? And how does that exposure, how should they think of that exposure to SpaceX as it moves towards becoming public?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, let's start from the beginning. We thought very carefully about, okay, the space economy is inflecting, is changing in its nature, and now there's an expanded universe of decent businesses that we can invest in. That's really how we started thinking about this. And we wanted to build purity of exposure. And what that means is going through finding the most interesting companies that are very much exposed to this growth trend. And as we were doing that analysis, we realized, and I think investors will increasingly as the IPO comes, how fundamental SpaceX has been as a company for this space. They've pushed the technological frontier, the commercial frontier, in terms of also becoming vertically integrating, bringing in that supply chain. It's a powerful business, and we just felt that it would be wrong to have an ETF without SpaceX in it. And when we explored the idea of bringing private, we thought, actually, it's worth looking into this and understanding. And we went through all of the legal work, the regulatory work, to make sure that every kind of part of it was sound, and we were making a deliberate decision to put it into the ETF. And so that's why it's at the top. It's held via SPV. In terms of valuations, we're actually starting to publish an FAQ on our website, and you can check out the valuation that we're buying the SPV at. There are liquid secondary markets where you can transact in SPV shares. You can also even transact in direct equity holdings within SpaceX, and we're utilizing those to bring that position into the ETF. It's important for those investors that are thinking about doing this themselves that they are carefully read all of the documentation. And we're institutional investors. We've been doing this. Some of us have experience in private investing as well. And so we've spent time doing that so that investors don't have to, in a way. You can easily buy the ETF and be confident that we've looked at the underlyings of all of these investments. And so we bring it all together as a package and give investors exposure to the space economy with SpaceX in it.
Is there any companies similar to SpaceX that are private, not yet public, space focused, and that you were very interested in having in there? Any others that you went through the trouble of getting access to?
Not in the space economy, not at the moment. That's not to rule it out in the future, but I would say most of the ones that are very interesting are still quite early in their development. Space is a risky frontier, and so you have to kind of retire some of that risk before it becomes a position that's interesting for us.
So let's talk SpaceX valuation, because obviously it's very attractive, right, for people right now. You've already seen in just two and a half weeks of this ETF being live over $150 million put into it. So clearly people are attracted to this industry, want to invest in it. But how should people be thinking about valuation for this industry? SpaceX, if they were to IPO at $1.5–2 trillion, the revenue number on there, when you look at other companies in that area, would not line up, right, in terms of revenue, profit, all these other metrics. So how do you even evaluate this space economy right now? I think the key part of it is what you just said there, which is it's becoming more of a commercial than a government economy.
Yeah, look, it's exactly right. So just so investors are kind of aware, right? We are purchasing these stakes. Typically, the last financing round that SpaceX did was about 1.25 trillion. And that was when XAI was merged into SpaceX as a business, and they raised some money off the back of that. The valuation at IPO, there's some rumors it's going to be 1.75 to maybe 2 trillion Who knows? It's going to come probably in June. That's the latest that we've heard in the press. We're buying our stake at a small premium to that 1.25, so around 1.44 trillion valuation. Look, how do you justify it? I think you have to do a lot of groundwork and analysis and understand, one, the position of the business in terms of launch. Last year they were responsible for 80% of the launches. You saw today, yesterday actually, Blue Origin. Blue Origin managed to achieve landing, reusable booster after a long period of time of trying as well, but they lost the satellite, so they misplaced the satellite that they were supposed to launch. And it's not easy to do what SpaceX is doing at a commercial scale over and over again. And I think that's an important part of the valuation to understand. It's a vertically integrated business. So they own the Starlink satellite constellation, which is the biggest in the world. And they are providing broadband services to dish providers and also through direct-to-device in certain cases. And there's the potential for future growth. So even if you just take the piece that's generating cash flow, and it's EBITDA positive, despite what some headlines have said, you don't have to make crazy assumptions about the penetration rate of broadband into the unbroadband population of the world to start to see EBITDA numbers that justify this valuation. So if you take right now in the globe, there are about 2.5 to maybe 4 billion people that don't have access to broadband. And even if you assume, half of that or even less are able to actually, or maybe even a quarter, are able to actually pay for that broadband, you start to quickly see how at $50 a month, which is half of the price SpaceX is currently or Starlink is currently charging, you can quickly put together a calculation where this company can be making 100 billion of EBITDA just on the basis of the mobile network that it's created.
Yeah.
Think about that as the sort of underpinning. Now, it's going to be sometime in the future and it's going to take time. But what encouraged us is that this isn't just a business that relies on launch, the money it's making on launch, or any other services that are potentially prone to cycles and a bit more speculative. This is a business that actually generates EBITDA, and the margins are very high. Information's reported that we're talking about 75% EBITDA margins, high capex, high EBITDA margins. That keeps us kind of sane, if you see what I mean, in terms of the valuation of the business.
Definitely. And we are now talking about like people thinking a little bit more about the valuation. How does it fit into portfolio? Is your mindset like, hey, every person that is very interested in this space region and sector and technology in the future, like you probably want to have access to something like SpaceX inside of your regular brokerage or the overall NASA ETF? Basically, like where does it fit into portfolio versus someone's regular core exposure?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and we're getting asked that by advisors and investors every day now. The ETF's about to hit about 200 million as well, and we're getting a lot of interest. And I think investors are interested in space exposure, but they're really starting to understand that the space economy is going to enter a new chapter. And that chapter has been enabled by SpaceX by falling launch costs, which is going to just open up investment opportunities in terms of data centers in space, manufacturing space, building out our orbital infrastructure. When I was looking at stuff and trying to analyze data centers in space, it just felt like some sort of buzzword and kind of really strange concept. But when you start to do the analysis, you realize it actually makes quite a bit of sense. And a lot of very sensible companies, not just SpaceX under Elon Musk, are looking into this. And the reason is, the energy cost is zero in space. So you have essentially infinite energy. And as we know, data centers demand a huge amount of energy and electricity. And so if you put them up into space, you don't have to worry about energy costs. And you also don't have to worry about cooling, because you just kind of blow it away, right? Because the radiation in space is in a vacuum. And so you essentially can build that orbital infrastructure away from Earth, and a lot of people have issues with data centers close to their own kind of homes and things like that. And you also create latency, so the ability of those data centers to power whatever they're doing very, very quickly. So if you think about, we enter a world of autonomous driving, robotics, you need that quick latency from those things. And so, sorry, I digressed a little bit, but essentially investors need to think about the opportunities that are opening up, which are going to be vast and across a lot of different companies. And so it's worthwhile having a diversified exposure to the space economy, because it's really one of the few open-ended growth stories in the stock market today. The other thing that investors should think about is, well, SpaceX is going to come to the market. It's going to be a very, very large company. And it's going to probably enter benchmarks. Some people say 15 days after the IPO. And that is going to mean lots of investors have to look at it. If you're a long-only active manager or hedge fund manager, you're benchmarked to the S&P 500, you need to look at it. And that will mean more eyeballs on the entire space economy as they start to look to alternatives or whatever it might be. So we think there is going to be increased interest, and investors should think about finding a home for in their portfolio for this.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that you hit on there is that it's a very open-ended potential investment, in that we don't really have, there's a lot of capabilities and possibilities. I don't really think that X years ago people were thinking about putting data centers into space. That really wasn't what people were doing space exploration for. Maybe it was satellites, right, or some other pieces, but it's really continued to excel and move forward. By the way, I'm seeing some comments. If anybody's interested in checking this out, the ticker is NASA. It's a NASA ETF, and it's already doing quite well as well. And obviously, it hasn't hurt the performance of the space overall. And it actually just went back to green on the day today. Today's been a very volatile day, especially for some of the space names. Opening up with a gap down, then gapping up, but back into the green, and currently trading up 27.95% in 20 days since launch. And you guys did coincide that launch with Artemis 2 launch. Was that just luck? I know those launches are hard to hit.
Oh, look, we because of weather and things like that. I can't say with a straight face that was extremely well timed, and we had a phone line into NASA, and we knew exactly when they were going to launch. We've been looking at this space for a while, and we've been looking for kind of a combination of three things: inflecting launch costs, they're coming down and they're going to enable new things; an investable universe, as in enough companies to support kind of quality investing; and the third thing, which is really kind of interest from investors and more eyeballs on the space, because it's great to have some areas that might be a bit niche, right? And this feels like it's coming into the mainstream. We filed it as soon as we could, and we launched the ETF pretty much as soon as it went effective. So we were very lucky that it coincided with the Artemis 2 mission. I think it's captured people's imagination in space. But one thing I would just want investors to realize is how many kind of stages there are to this story. There's all of the things that space technology is going to enable on Earth, all of the things it's going to enable into orbital infrastructure, and then, of course, exploration. And I think historically, investors have just thought about space as kind of that exploration piece, plus perhaps a bit of defense. But it's the growth stories on Earth and its orbital infrastructure that I think are going to be the ones that unlock over the next decade.
Really good stuff on SpaceX. If anybody in the chat, anybody that's watching has questions on SpaceX, feel free to dump them in, and I will get to them. I see a good little YouTube audience with us here as well today. Appreciate y'all tuning in. So two of the other names as well, I just want to talk about some of the other core names that are in here together with SpaceX. The two that you have listed as portfolio highlights are AST Space Mobile, so ASTS, which had a pretty big drop today of around 15% at one point because of, I believe, the Blue Origin failed mission, and it has recovered actually a good amount. So something interesting, as we're talking here, this morning it was down 15%. Now it's only down 8%. So it's moved up 7% just since this morning. And then Filtronic is the other name listed here. And I would guess a lot less of my audience is actually familiar with Filtronic than with ASTS or SpaceX. So very curious to hear you talk about some of these other sympathy plays.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Let me pick up on Filtronic, because I think it's a real unique kind of differentiator of this ETF, maybe versus some competitor ETFs people might be thinking about. Look, one of the things that we've managed to do is uncover a lot of really interesting supply chain providers into the space economy. And often these companies are listed in Korea, Taiwan, or the UK in the case of Filtronic.
Yep. I think we might.
They were often sleepy.
Oh, you're back. Sorry. It glitched for a second for me, but you're good now.
No worries. So Filtronic is a really interesting UK-based business that supplies the radio frequency components that go into the satellites and the base stations. Their biggest customer is SpaceX, so they've made public that they're going to be talking to others and diversifying away from that. And really, it's a company that's seen explosive growth, because every satellite that launches and every constellation that wants to build needs to have these components in it. and the amount of those components keeps increasing as well as they grow in complexity. And so we think it's a really interesting under the radar business. And that I think is a key point. Some of these suppliers are in the UK and Korea and Taiwan, and US investors often don't have access to them, or they haven't spent the time to find these. And we've...
Is this an OTC?
No, it's listed. We own the shares listed in London.
Ah, interesting. Okay, got it. So this is not on, like, US stock market investors aren't going to be able to directly invest in this.
More difficult to get exposure to it. So you have to deal with the currency risk. It's a small, medium-sized company in the UK.
Wow. This is already up past year 150%.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating business. I mean, it's literally one that went from being kind of slow growth, boring defense supplier to essentially supplying SpaceX, winning the contract, and then just being a increasing growth, right? And the growth rate has...
Yeah, look at the 5-year. It's almost up 3,000%. This thing's doing more than NVIDIA. Crazy.
It's a much smaller company as well. So it had a just.
Oh my gosh! Wow. Okay, so this went from basically like a tiny micro cap. Wow. Sorry.
And it's a transformation because, and as some of the investors might know, the UK market has been kind of left behind the rest of the world, and this is one of the kind of rare winners in the UK small and mid-sized market. They have a new facility up in Durham in the UK. They're, as I said, a major supplier to SpaceX, and we're really proud to have it as part of our ETF as well.
Incredible. Yeah, those are some of my favorite ones. I want to take a question. Someone asked for your thoughts on your second biggest holding, which is Rocket Lab.
Yeah. So one of the things, and there's kind of two themes that we wanted to express in the portfolio. The first is there is going to have to be competition for SpaceX. And so SpaceX has pioneered the path in terms of what it is to build a vertically integrated business. And there's going to have to be competitors. And competitors have to exist because many people who need to put payloads up into low Earth orbit just need an alternative provider, because SpaceX is a competitor often to them because of the Starlink business and it's vertically integrated. And often it's about sovereignty as well. Yeah. Now, Rocket Lab is still a US company, but it is one of the few businesses that has a clear and working launch platform, and it's able to deliver payloads up into space. And they are continuing to push the envelope in many areas as well. So it's a very interesting company. Now, the challenge with it, of course, is valuation. And that is a challenge with some of the space companies as well. They capture the attention of people, and people pile in. And you need to be able to weather some of these valuation storms over time as a long-term investor. So what we try to do is focus on the fundamentals of these businesses. Are they pursuing the right business model? Do they have a good balance sheet and structure? Do they have a good management team that's leading the company through this period? And for long-term investors, even when valuations are high, you can be comfortable that the fundamentals are going to follow through over time. And so Rocket Lab is a perfect example of that. Kind of the number 2, I would say, player in the launch economy, and is going to be one that is going to, take some share or potentially win business away from SpaceX over time as there's a diversification that happens. The sub-theme here, by the way, is the international side of things. We are going to see more and more international companies come in and compete with SpaceX and Rocket Lab and build launch and satellite platforms. And I think that is going to be an important part. So about 30% of this ETF are international companies, including some of the champions that are being built in Germany, Italy, France, as well as in Asia. And that, I think, is an important part. Unfortunately, the world is no longer collaborating in space, and we're going to see countries prioritize their homegrown domestic champions.
Have you ever seen the movie Ad Astra with Brad Pitt?
I haven't, no.
Oh, it's a good one. Basically, it's set in the future, and the idea is that space exploration became like the #1 focus, and it became such a big focus that the moon has now turned into a war zone, and US, Russia, China, everybody has like full war bases now on the moon, and then they're going to the next step, and now it's going to Mars. And it's like, where else can humanity set up shop to have war?
I mean, hopefully this is not what it is, but what we're seeing right now is, and I think it goes back to the days where Starlink service was cut off in Ukraine. I just think the reality is, in Europe, they're realizing they need to have their own satellite constellations. They need to have their own launch platforms, and they cannot rely on this. The history of space has always been about collaboration, but now that's not happening anymore. And so Germany's announced, I think, 30 billion of euros of investment by the end of the decade. And, we have a company in the top 10 there, OHB, which is going to benefit and hopefully win some of that business. Avio is another business that's based out in Italy, that's launching rockets for Europe for our other partners. This is, I think, the age where each country or each country region is going to have its champions. And because of that commercial element, the realization that commercial businesses are able to deliver this better, there's going to be national champions that we can invest in.
Yeah, I love that thought process, especially when you're talking about how, hey, there's this small company, but they're a massive, customer for SpaceX, or SpaceX is a big customer for them, and they're linked in, and ordinary people wouldn't see this, right? You have to dig into it. It reminds me, there was a name recently, Kraken, if you've seen it, that I believe they do underwater aviation and engineering for Anduril. And because they were like their only sole person there, Anduril was like, all right, we're launching this whole underwater series, and the stock's up like hundreds and hundreds of percent now when you find these little gems. So I had a question for you within here, because you mentioned that sometimes it's tough with the valuations. What was the hardest stock to put into the NASA ETF from a perspective of, I really like this stock, I want to have it in here, but man, this is a tough place to put it in at?
Yeah, I think we took a lot of comfort by finding those stocks that you talked about before, the sort of under the radar supply chain businesses. What's great about them is that they're often not that well known, often smaller companies. You can get your hands around them a bit better, and often businesses that are higher quality. They're generating cash because they have a big partner like SpaceX paying the cash flows. They are investing in R&D. They have good management teams. They have other exposures as well. So often their businesses were doing something else, and then they've transitioned a bit more into space. So I would say that I think otherwise it is tougher to find interesting businesses within the space that meet strict valuation criteria. And then the second part is we spend a lot of time just thinking, okay, what is the potential here of this business? These are fast-growing businesses, so in a couple of years' time, they're going to be profitable. They're going to be generating cash flow often right now, and that's maybe one of the things that, again, kept us quite sane on the valuations. Because launch requires a lot of prepayment, satellite construction requires prepayment. These companies are cash generative today, and they'll be profitable in a year or two's time. And that means that you have a business that's more sustainable than maybe one that is unprofitable and burning cash at the same time. So those things keep us kind of calm in terms of analyzing the companies and building the portfolio. And really, we probably wouldn't have launched this if we didn't believe that was possible.
Awesome. And I want to bring this back to SpaceX as we move towards the end of this, and just talk about Elon Musk for a second. Elon, SpaceX becomes $1 trillion company, which it sure looks like it. I believe will be the first person to be CEO of multiple, or I guess he's not technically CEO or chairman. He will be the first person to champion and lead, I believe, 2 multi-trillion-dollar companies, or at least trillion-dollar companies, potentially multi-trillion-dollar companies. He's balancing a lot. There's a lot going on. How do you think of him as a leader for this company, as it's the largest holding in your ETF?
It's very interesting. And, he is a figure that can kind of divide audiences, right? I think there's people who believe he's kind of the world's most important entrepreneur. There's other people think he's stretched thin, and he's taking advantage of shareholders with very generous kind of shareholder packages of payment for himself. The reality is, when the S1 hits and people start to really read about SpaceX and it comes into the view of the public market, I think they're going to see what has been achieved. And we've seen Tesla, and we've previously kind of seen X just because of its kind of public nature. But I guarantee that a lot of investors don't know what SpaceX has managed to achieve. They don't know its market position. They don't know the vertical integration, what the trials are really, and a company that has really transformed the industry. And to me, that I think is going to be thrust into the light, and people are going to realize that's basically Elon Musk that's delivered that. It's a company that is really outstanding in that sense. And so whether he's sort of split or not, I think the view in general in the market is that someday maybe this all gets consolidated into one and there's a grander vision. But the reality is that he's managed to manage this company while managing Tesla at the same time, and it's sort of worked out so far. Maybe I'll leave you with one kind of, or we talk maybe a little bit about how genuinely transformational this company's been to the space economy. I'll tell you a little anecdote about it. And I recently learned this. They were pushing the envelope so far, and the truth is they were trying a lot of things, and their general kind of modus operandi is, let's just try it out. And if it doesn't work, the rocket blows up or the satellite doesn't work, it's fine. We've got so many kind of coming behind it, and it'll increase our learning rate. And so one of the things that I heard about was when a satellite gets deployed, that it needs to open its wings, which are the solar panels. Everyone's seen those massive solar panels that satellites have. It does that once in its entire life. And apparently engineers at previous kind of aerospace companies, Airbus, etc., have spent years developing the little engine, the little motor that's going to open those wings, to do that just once in space.
Yeah.
And someone at SpaceX had the idea, well, why don't we just put a little toy motor and it'll do that? And that's how a lot of those satellites work now. And it's that kind of mentality that has pushed the space economy to where we are today, which is let's try, let's fail, let's keep pushing, and let's get this industry to a mass production level, which will unlock a lot of opportunities for everyone.
Yeah, I think it's just becoming more and more clear as to the economic viability of doing this as you think about data centers and energy and other pieces, right, that come into it. And so it just gives people more and more reasons, gives corporations an energy drive to go ahead and make it possible. And last question, just for the SpaceX crowd watching, why do you think SpaceX is going to IPO? Elon Musk, if you went back a year or two ago, people would say that's too much of a headache. He already hates being public. He's joked about taking Tesla private. They have plenty of opportunities to raise capital anytime they want at SpaceX. So why do you think they are going public?
That is a great question. And I'm not sure I'm going to be able to speculate what the answer is. There are many different theories out there for why this might be the case. We don't really have one. Actually, I really welcome it. I think companies are staying private too long. And for the average investors, it's tougher and tougher to get access to the real innovative businesses. And so as a public investor who's been doing this for 15, 20 years, it feels like the right thing that a company of this size should be a public business. Whether there are merits to staying private longer or not, it's a great kind of question. And there are obviously some positive and negative theories, but I'm probably not in a position to speculate why they're doing it. I just welcome it. And I think it's important that businesses of this size should probably be in the public markets.
That's a good point. Excited to open it up to more people. But again, for those that are interested in investing in SpaceX pre-IPO, we've talked through it for a while in here, and we're going to wrap up here. But just to show people one more time, you can go straight to the website. It is temaetfs.com, and you can see right on here the NASA ETF, NASA. Type it into your brokerage anywhere. You should be able to check it out. Make sure that you do read the prospectus and the summary prospectus, which can be both found on here. You can check out the fact sheet. There's a lot of details on here, such as where people see this economy going, what the tailwinds are, the companies, the holdings themselves, all the details around expense ratio, AUM, pieces along those lines. Easy to find and go through. We didn't talk about a couple of these others, but Firefly's picking up steam. People talking about it a lot. Planet Labs been around for a long time. And then if people go through the full holdings, you'll be able to see a lot of these names that got talked about on here as some of these smaller, lesser known gems as well. Yuri, if people have additional questions for you, where's the best place for them to ask Tema any questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's tons of information on our website. And as I mentioned, we recently published an FAQ where you can get some information, especially around the SpaceX stake and how kind of that works. We're big believers in transparency, and we want to make sure that it's very clear how and when and where and in what capacity we're approaching SpaceX and the exposures in this ETF. ETFs are public vehicles. You can see all our holdings, all of our investment ideas are out there for people to see. We're going to be publishing a ton of content on space, so you can check out our Twitter account at Tema ETFs, or you can go to our website and go to the Insights section, subscribe to the newsletter. We'll be publishing interesting articles about the space economy as it evolves. There's so much cool stuff out there that's happening, and we want to bring it in an accessible way to investors. So it's a great account to follow for those who are interested in seeing that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yuri, appreciate you joining me today. Looking forward to our next conversation. Wishing you the best.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Hey, we'll see you on the next one. Have a great one, everybody. And best of luck in the market. Continued all-time highs. Thanks for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, go check out the Wolf Financial newsletter. Did you know that we make a ton of content? We host 60 plus hours of Twitter Spaces and live streams every single week. We're posting on the timeline over and over and over. We put up YouTube videos, and one of our prime gems is our newsletter. And it's free into your inbox multiple times a week. We mix it up. We give stock picks, market headlines, research, info. It's a great way for you to stay in touch with the stock market and your portfolio without having to spend 8 hours a day staring at your brokerage screen. So again, the link is below. It is free to grab, and you're going to love the content in it.